Welcome to Not for Pie Eaters. I'm John Dougal. Today's video is titled The One That Got Away. So we're going to look at women when they don't get the guy that they wanted. Most women have an idea of who they think would be their ideal man. And they dream about this guy before they ever meet him. And today, most women will have had several relationships before they finally pair off and have a family. But what happens when a woman gets into a relationship with a man who's close to her ideal, but then she gets dumped? It's a problem. Does she accept that she wasn't the one that he wanted? If she does, her self-esteem's going to take a hit. If she doesn't, does she blame someone else? Does she blame the bastard who left her, or the bitch who stole him? Regardless, it's going to be a problem for any man that comes along afterwards. And it's going to be a problem for the woman unless she can find a way to resolve what happened and then accept it. I placed today's video in the wisdom playlist since we'll be exploring wisdom that's necessary in a situation like this. Society's changed. Back in the time of your grandparents and your great-grandparents, people didn't run through so many relationships before pairing up and starting a family. But that's not how it is today. In the basic template, relationships fall under the need for connecting. Connecting, belonging, and love. And the first video I made in the People playlist discusses the 5 basic psychological needs. There's survival, connecting, power, freedom, and fun. And if you haven't seen that video, I'll provide a link to it at the end of this presentation. But back to topic, what happens if you marry a woman where she had a prior relationship with a guy who she would call, but only to herself, Mr. Right, or the one who got away? Well, I've got some personal experience on this. I grew up in such a family, so I know what it's like, at least from a kid's perspective. Both of my parents are no longer living, so it's no fear of airing dirty laundry. But I want you to understand what can happen when a woman marries Mr. Second Best. I grew up as a kid feeling that something was a little off between my mother and father. There wasn't the love I saw between the parents of many of my friends. That's not to say that my parents didn't get along. Both of my parents had a sense of duty that's kind of their generation. So they had a sense of duty to each other, and they both expressed love for both myself and my sister. But it seemed like there was something missing between the two of them. And there wasn't any hate, it's far from it. It was mostly kind of meh, like two friends, but not particularly close friends. Well, how did that happen with my folks? I didn't find out till later in life, and I actually found out through my sister, when I was a grown man. Apparently all the years that they were together, which was over 50 years, my mother was still pining for the one who got away. And it turns out that when my mother was in her late 20s, that her best friend stole her boyfriend, and then those two got married. And this was a time period where the average age for a newlywed woman was 20 years old. So that put my mother into a position of being an old maid without somebody. And then my father came along and saved the day, or did he? Because my father was Mr. Second Best, and my mother never got over the one who got away. Well, people love a happily ever after story, but more often than not, that's not life. Today the likelihood of the final pairing being, between two people that see each other as each other's ideal, it's even more unlikely. Most women have been in several relationships before they finally have kids. I'm diving into this subject and I'm a little bit pensive about it because I don't want this channel to be just a relationship channel. This channel is about living your best life, But, with your psychological needs, one of them being connecting, you can't cover everything unless occasionally you do dive into relationships. So, so here we are. And it's important for us to talk about these sorts of things now and then. Being in a relationship where the guy is viewed as Mr. Second Best is not good. It'll fall short to some degree in meeting the need of a meaningful connection between the man and wife. And that's why it's an important topic, and that's why you need wisdom so that you ideally can avoid such a situation, or if you do find yourself in that situation, how you best navigate through it. To start off kind of diving into this, I want to get into a church story about a friend of mine. It happened a long time ago, and I'll change her name and call her Natalie. Well, Natalie was in prayer one day, and God asked her, well, why do you want to get married? And Natalie was excited that God wanted to talk to her about such an important subject. So she started to rattle off, a long list of all the reasons why she wanted to get married, all the benefits she'd received from being married. And of course, the list matched the assumption that she'd marry Mr. Right. Well, money wouldn't be so tight. Life would be easier. She'd feel loved and valued and safe and protected. She'd be proud to be in public with a great husband, holding her hand, and she could have a family, she could have children, and Mr. Right would provide for them, at the least when the kids were little, so she could be a stay-at-home mom, and the list would go on and on. Well, when she finally stopped to get her breath, God spoke to her again. Well, Natalie, you're telling me all the things that you're looking forward to receive, but you haven't told me about anything where you're looking forward to give. And Natalie felt absolutely busted. She's talking with the creator of the universe, and he called her out, and she felt absolutely selfish. She'd never given a single thought as to what she would need to give up, to have Mr. Right in her relationship. Well, was this situation unique to Natalie, or is it a situation that's common for most women? David Buss wrote a book that I like. It's titled The Evolution of Desire. It was written about 12 years ago, and it's an evolutionary psychology book on mating, on relationships. And chapter 2 is titled What Women Want. It's kind of like Natalie's long laundry list. You'll find, what constitutes a Mr. Right, what he can provide, and it's based on an enormous amount of studies, virtually all over the globe. And from an evolutionary perspective, it's all about provision, protection, social status, loyalty, parental investment, and good genes. It's where you see a woman's need for a bit of a bad boy, the kind of guy who won't hesitate and ponder, when he should be taking action. Action to lead, to be productive, to be industrious, involved with the kids, and that sort of thing. It's all about receiving. It's all about her getting what she wants, and it's never about giving. And it makes you wonder, what is love for a woman towards a man? You can go down that rabbit hole for eons. But it's in a woman's intrinsic nature to be this way, and we'll just leave it there for now. So what happens when she's been in a relationship with an ideal guy who then dumps her? Do you think she just gets over it? Or do you think she's ever ruminating about the one who got away? Well, it doesn't even really matter what age bracket you're in. For the majority of women today, regardless of age, there's a guy somewhere back in yesteryear who is viewed as the one who got away. And the situation has been common, ever since the 1960s. In the 1960s, or roughly 1960, that's when the pill came out. And the pill gave birth to the sexual revolution. Before the pill, fear of a ruined life, from sex outside of a committed relationship was a real thing. Premarital sex could lead to being a single mom, and few women were professionals. Few women, therefore, could have a good life as a single mom. Society was not geared towards single moms. And, a baby out of wedlock realistically could ruin your life. So what were the alternatives? Well, there'd be either forced marriage or carrying the stigma. But the pill took all that fear away, and so did the 1973 decision of Roe versus Wade, because if the pill didn't work, abortion could. Well, these societal changes empowered the feminist movement, and sex no longer had to lead to motherhood. The sexual revolution meant sexual freedom and normalized sex apart from marriages. And then third wave feminism came along in the 1990s, and the sex positivity movement with it. And sex positivity promoted sexual experiences and sexual freedom, where the desire for women to basically be just like men, get as much as you want. Well, the consequence of that is a lot more sexual partners. And so how many sexual partners have women had who are now in their 40s or in their 30s or in their 20s? It's difficult to say because there's still some stigma, at least some from other women, some from some stuffy men about, a woman's high body count. And so when merely asked, I think even to this day, most women will lie. They'd be reluctant to tell you. And then if they do tell you, well, then there's podcasters out there who would say, well, take whatever number the woman tells you and then multiply by 3, because women don't count flings, no one-night stands. They only count sex when it's in a form of a relationship. So you ask them how many partners have you had, and they answer how many relationships they've had. Well, if you've ever wondered why when a woman gets dumped, invariably, the guy's an asshole. That's the response you tend to see. Well, what's the alternative? The alternative would be for the woman to say to herself, I wasn't good enough for him. Well, that's the honest answer, but I don't think most women, I don't think they have the moral fortitude to be that honest. Have you ever heard a woman make this admission? Well, she wants to believe for this guy that was Mr. Right in her eyes that she was good enough. That way she can dream and pursue another guy who is at least as good, if not better. The slide on the screen, it compares the percentage of men and women who are happy in their marriages and contrasts that against the number of sexual partners each has had. And the trend shows decreased happiness as the number of sexual partners increase, but it's notably worse for women than it is for men. Women who've had 6 to 10 sexual partners have the lowest odds of marital happiness, which begs the question, why? And I'd suggest as a hypothesis that out of the 10 sexual partners relationships, a woman is bound to have been in a relationship with a guy that's close to her ideal. And everyone else has been Mr. Second Best, Mr. Third Best, and so forth. And she's probably had more partners than the 6 to 10. If the podcasters are right, it's more like 18 to 30. So the odds are pretty good that somewhere along the line was a great guy who dumped her for someone better. And she'll tell her friends that, he was an asshole, but she'll still pine for him. And the alternative, like I said, is to say, well, I wasn't good enough. Either way, she's not happy. And she'll be unhappy with anyone who doesn't measure up thereafter. And that's why I have the hypothesis. I think that correlates to what the data shows. Okay, on this chart, it shows the odds of divorce as the number of sexual partners increase, and it's for the 1980s, 90s, and 2000s. And both of these charts, it came from an article in The Atlantic in 2018, October 22nd, by Olga Kazan, where the charts were referenced in that article from the Institute of Family Studies at the University of Utah. Well, the conclusion is a high body count increases the odds that a woman will have been with a great guy who's then becomes, the one that got away, and she's unhappy afterwards with anyone else who comes along. Okay, now let's talk about Mr. Second Best. You're a decent guy. You have your act together. Maybe you've had a measure of success in the world at your career, and maybe you got a few nickels in your pocket. You could be 5'11". That's not 6'3" like Mr. Right, but it's still taller than average. You're a decent looking guy. You may not be ripped, and you don't look like you belong on the cover of GQ, but you look fine. You dress fine. Your income and your wealth put you in the top 25% for your age, but not in the 5% top like the one who got away. So you're always going to be decent, okay, which translates into being a bit of irritation in her mind as she compares you to Mr. Right. In actuality, you're always going to be Mr. Not Good Enough. Well, when a guy is not good enough, the woman has no respect for him. She's with you because she couldn't get what she wanted. She wanted children. She wanted to be taken care of. She wanted the prestige of being Mr. Right's girl. She wanted to receive, and she didn't put much thought into giving. But here's the rub, the truth. I'm going to flip it back on the men. Why do so many men let a woman who's been with 10 men put them in the role of Mr. Second Best? Why does a man put up with her continual unhappiness and dissatisfaction? Why do so many men put their faith and hope that, hey, maybe next year it'll be better? In Ephesians chapter 5, each one of you also must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. This is a commandment. So a man is commanded to love his wife, even if she is pining for some other guy, even if he is Mr. Second Best. And it's interesting that the focus, in this verse is that love is to be given by the man, but respect is to be given by the woman. And just pose a question to you: how is she ever going to respect you if she thinks you're Mr. Second Best? She can't, so she needs to resolve that internal conflict. From the fall, the woman was given the curse to want to be in control of her husband, to try to control him or to use him for her advantage. And this is why I believe that the woman is commanded to respect her man, because it goes against the curse, from the fall, and it goes against her curse, her nature rather, to be selfish. Unless she's with Mr. Right, then life is easier. So a woman needs to be reminded that a man deserves respect. We live in a fallen world, and men sin, women sin, and people may clean up their act of it, but they'll never rid themselves completely from sin. There's none righteous, not even one. We can't keep ourselves from all sin. We might clean up our act a little bit, but picture a barrel of wine and somebody poured a cup of sewage into it. You can do whatever you want, and maybe you can find some kind of refining process or whatever, but there's always going to be sewage in that wine. I wouldn't want to drink it, and neither would you. So we need to realize that our intentions might be to be honorable and to do the right thing, but we're not always capable of it. With God through Christ, all things are possible, and we can do better. But, we need to realize, too, that Jesus isn't Santa Claus. He isn't going to wrap us in bubble wrap and keep us safe. And he's not going to fix all the consequences of our mistakes, our sin. So what can you do in a practical sense if you're a man or a woman? You want a relationship, and you'll want to avoid this Mr. Second Best syndrome, whether you're a man or a woman. Well, if you're a man and you're dating, fair game, and you should ask, her to tell you, where do I stand? What's the best guy you've ever been with? And if you're Mr. Second Best, you need to seriously consider bailing on her. Tell her it won't work for you to be Mr. Second Best, that you deserve respect, you deserve love, you deserve a life where she's thinking of you highly, and she's not ruminating on the one that got away. Likelihood she won't tell you, And then that's a red flag. She's looking after her best interest. She's not looking out after yours. And so that's a sign that she's all receive and no give. But you still need to figure out if she'll respect you, or if she'll just wants you for your benefit because you're better than nothing. And you need to think that of the possibility that maybe in her mind, you're just a stopgap till somebody better comes along. Well, if you're a woman and you've lost Mr. Wonderful, I'm just going to lay it out there. You're in a bad spot. It's in your intrinsic nature to want to get a guy that's at least is that good. And, women always have their feelings and their emotions pitted against reason, especially, well, more so than, I should say, rather than especially, but more so when it comes to relationships. But, you got to look at life and say, you keep holding out, are you really going to find Mr. Right? Or are you going to end up with a house full of cats? What's the odds of getting Mr. Right? If a guy is truly Mr. Wonderful, what percentage of guys out there are actually going to measure up? Is it 1 in 1,000? 1 in 100? Or maybe you've got a lower bar and maybe it's 1 in 10. But relationships, at least at the very beginning, are a trade. It's never going to work unless you each feel like you're getting a good deal. And so you got to ask yourself the question, well, what makes you so special? What makes you a fair trade for Mr. Wonderful? What do you give and what do you have for Mr. Wonderful that few other women have or could give? Are you 1 in 1,000 like Mr. Wonderful is? Are you 1 in 100? Are you 1 in 10 or less? And then here's the $1 million question. Are you like Natalie? Do you even know what a good man values and what he's looking for you to give and bring to a relationship? Every woman is an optimist. They always want to believe they'll be the exception, that Mr. Wonderful will just pick them. In part, I think this happens because I don't think women realize that men have two standards, and this is the sin nature of man. The lower standard of a man is to get laid. And that's a pretty low standard, and if beer's involved, it's even lower. The higher standard is for a lasting long-term relationship. It's hard to discuss this with talking about all men, but let's just talk about Mr. Wonderful, a guy who's really got his act together. He's going to know what his worth is. And do you honestly think a guy like that, he's really got his act together, is going to settle for less than a fair trade? So, a measure of honesty for the women out there and self-assessment, it can lead towards you working on yourself and self-improvement. Maybe you can work better and become the kind of a woman that this guy really wants. And I'm going to throw my 2 bits out there. This is anecdotal from my experience and from discussions with all of my friends. It isn't all about how hot the woman is. A guy will have like a measure to say, okay, she's got to be at least this good looking. And then after that, it's all personality and what she brings to the table and her character and how well you get along and how compatible you are. And so if you put some effort into self-improvement and to truly being the kind of a woman that a wonderful man is actually going to want, you got a better shot. But you got to think in terms of, what am I going to give? And stop thinking so much about what you want to receive. And then get some respect for men in general. Practice respecting men. See the good in men. Society doesn't work without men. And they aren't just blobs out there getting all the stuff done that you don't care about. So take some time to acknowledge men in general and show them respect for their role in society. And then do that self-assessment. Say, hey, is it fair to be selfish and to pair up with a man? Well, this is a tough one. I just want to pause for a second to give some weight to this. Is it fair to a man to pick him and have him be Mr. Second Best in your mind? You'd be shortchanging his life, and that's like the epitome of selfishness. And I'm appalled at the women who do that and haven't even considered the injustice of it. In the church world, everything that I've been saying here today, for the most part, is what would be called admonition. An admonition is a call to do better. It isn't a slam saying, "Oh, you wretched human beings, crawl on your bellies like a slug, like the slug you are." It's not that at all. Admonition is saying, "I got hope that you can do better, and I want you to do better." Well, if you've experienced, women out there, the one who got away, where is your realistic hope, and how can you do better? You're not going to have the life you want pining for the one who isn't there, and it's not going to be found by dwelling on what you feel like you deserve. Well, this subject, man, I could go on for hours, but the point's clear. To live a shortchanged life, men take the role of Mr. Second Best. To live a shortchanged life, women, pair up with Mr. Second Best without some sort of internal change, especially in the areas of respect and respecting his life and looking at what you should be given in a relationship, and realize that, hey, past decisions have consequences. That's why these women that have had all these relationships in general are so unhappy. And there is no Santa Claus who's going to come and make it all better, or, you just suddenly get blessed and sit around and do nothing. Well, today's video is a bit harsh, and I just want to say it again. It's not a slam against your character. All of us in this life are in the same position. We're all going to make mistakes and fall short. But, it's about admonishment today, and it's about a way forward, a way to do better. And I hope you can appreciate that. Consider giving the video a like if it's opened your mind. And here's a link to the psych needs that we discussed, and also your psychological values that sort of go along with that. Both of these videos will help you figure out, what you need and who you are. Thanks for joining. Cheers.